Hello, this is Friar Tim with the FriarSide chat for Friday, April 17th, Friday within the octave of Easter. I'm once again in the front parlor of St. Anthony of Padua Friary in Durham, and all the friars continue to be well. I hope you all are well as also. Know that both every morning and evening, the friars, when we gather in prayer, remember all of you in prayer. We are all well. Friar Bill and I particularly are well, so happy to share this with you. The reflection for today comes from a reflection on today's gospel reading, which is from the Gospel of John, chapter 21, verses 1 to 14, as follows. Jesus revealed himself again to his disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. He revealed himself in this way. Together with Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, Zebedee's sons, and 2 other disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We'll come with you too." So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. When it was already dawn, Jesus was standing on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, have you caught anything to eat?" They answered him, "No." So he said to them, "Cast the net over the right side of the boat, and you'll find something." So they cast it and were not able to pull it in because of the number of fish. So the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he tucked in his garment, for he was lightly clad, and jumped into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, for they were not far from shore, only about 100 yards, dragging the net with the fish. When they climbed out on shore, they saw a charcoal fire with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you just caught." So Simon Peter went over and dragged the net ashore full of 153 large fish. Even though there weren't so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come, have breakfast." And none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they realized it was the Lord. Jesus came over and took the bread and gave it to them, and in like manner the fish. This was now the 3rd time Jesus was revealed to his disciples after being raised from the dead. Again, a couple of points quite interesting in this account. The first is that the inability to really truly recognize Jesus. The second is the obvious scriptural overtones that fish and bread particularly, but fish being an early Christian symbol of Jesus. And the third point, the 153, many scriptural commentators would suggest that that was a mystic number that represented all of the peoples of the world. So it's a question of globality. That is, that the catch is going to embrace all of humanity, all of the 153 nations of the world, gathered together into one without the net breaking. But what I'd like to emphasize a little bit today is the attitude of the disciples at the beginning. Essentially, they're going back to work. Essentially, they've taken more or less a 3-year furlough to follow the Lord Jesus, to become his disciples. And now that that particular furlough was seemingly ended, they were going back to work, back to get a job, back to the daily normal, back to the humdrum, back to whatever it is that they were doing. In some ways, this is very similar to the 2 disciples leaving Jerusalem to go on the way to Emmaus. They were heading home. That particular chapter was ended, didn't end all too happily. Off they were going, back home, back to work, back to embrace the same old of their lives, as if the resurrection of Jesus never happened. Now, that's a continuing temptation, I think, for all of us, is to live as if God weren't there, or God weren't effective, or that the resurrection of Jesus never happened. We don't avert to it. We don't sense the majesty of it. We're not all caught up in it. And therefore, we tend to just pretend that there it's not there. And Jesus gave a very simple command. Toss your nets on the other side of the boat. Do something a little bit different. And this massive catch comes in, which the mystical number is one thing, but the other part of it is that's a nice day's work for this group of fishermen. 153 good-sized fish will feed the family pretty nicely, and then some to sell. So it was a good day for all concerned. What lesson can we draw from this? We who do believe in Jesus, and we who are trying to make of this present moment a moment of grace, a moment of life, a moment to celebrate the resurrection. I'm hearing on the news and reading on the internet and checking in with commentators, people are using the phrase the new normal a lot. Kind of getting us to begin to think that after everything returns back to normal, after this coronavirus pandemic, things will change. Things will be different. What that difference looks like, don't know. What that difference looks like in terms of economy, in terms of social relationships, in terms of family dynamics, don't know. But there does seem to be a palpable understanding that something will be different, that there will, in fact, be a new normal. Taking our lesson from today's gospel, what is it that is going to mark the new normal for me? What is it that Jesus is metaphorically asking me to cast my net on the other side instead of the side that I habitually cast the net on? What might God, what might the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ be teaching me to do slightly different? Now that I have so much free time on my hands, what perhaps can I do to deepen my own personal interior life? More prayer and meditation, more thoughtful reflection, more quiet time and less noise and distraction. Now that I'm in some enforced contact with my family, what might change? More willingness to spend time together, more willingness to share more deeply with one another, more willingness to open up with one another. Now that I have been deprived from regularly receiving the Eucharist or receiving the sacrament of reconciliation, how has my faith life changed? Am I reliant on God? Am I more reliant and more attentive to His Word? What might be the metaphorical other side of the boat in my spiritual life? This crisis has opened us up to huge social divides that the poorest and people of color tend to be more disproportionately affected by death in the coronavirus than most of the other populations. What does that tell us about the world in which we live and the society in which we live? We've all been more attentive to reach out via internet, via cell phone, via Zoom, via whatever platform it is that we're using for the people that love us. How might we be just a little bit different in the future? Again, if this moment is just a momentary fad, it's just a momentary experience, pleasant or unpleasant, difficult or taxing or whatever it happens to be, but nothing really effectively moves in our life, have we responded to whatever the gift that God is giving us, wrapped in a somewhat mysterious, difficult package? So I invite you, much like I invite myself to really prayerfully ponder, what side of the boat is God asking me to do something different with? So that the new normal is not just returning to the job, returning to the daily grind, returning to the schedule, returning to taking my kids to school, returning to this, and returning to that. But what might God be making new out of today? Because ultimately, the power of the resurrection is that everything can be made new. Because even death can be overcome. And if death can be overcome, and I trust in that, God can make anything new. So with that, have a blessed weekend. Continue to pray and continue to discern. Continue to be patient in whatever it is that happens to be trying for you in this time. And continue to keep one another alive in faith as we try to keep together the spirit of the Newman community here in Chapel Hill. God bless and take care.